My name is Emily. I'm 32 years old, and this is my confession. I don't even know how it got to this point. It's been weeks since it all went down. And I still can't wrap my head around how everything unraveled so quickly. I never thought Ryan would leave me, not over something like this. But he did, and now I'm sitting here, replaying every moment, wondering if I could have done things differently. It started a few weeks ago at one of our usual Friday night gatherings with friends. These nights were our little escape, a chance to unwind, laugh, and forget about the daily grind. Mike and Ashley hosted, as they usually did, and the group was there, Jason, Hannah, and a few others. The house was buzzing with the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses. Everyone seemed to be having a great time, except for Ryan. Ryan wasn't usually the life of the party. But he wasn't like this either. He just sat in the corner of the couch, quietly nursing a beer. His head was down, and he looked tired. No, more than tired, like the weight of the world was pressing on his shoulders. Normally, he'd crack a sarcastic joke or at least comment on whatever game was playing on TV. But tonight, he barely said a word. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe he'd had a tough day at work. Maybe he just needed a little time to warm up. But as the night wore on, it started to irritate me. Everyone else was laughing, sharing stories, and having fun, while Ryan sat there like a statue. It felt like he was dragging the whole vibe down. And honestly, I was getting fed up. I shot him a few glances, trying to silently say, "Hey, what's your deal? Snap out of it," but he didn't even look up. He just stared into his beer like it held the answer to all his problems. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't mean to make a scene, I was just frustrated. So I said it, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Man up." Ryan. The words came out sharper than I intended. And the second they left my mouth, I regretted them, but it was too late. The room went quiet, except for a few nervous chuckles. Ryan froze, his eyes slowly lifting to meet mine. There was no anger in his expression, just something colder. Something that made my stomach drop. He stared at me for a long moment, then set his beer down on the coffee table and stood up. Without a word, he walked out of the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click. But it felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. The air in the room was thick. The kind of silence that made everyone uncomfortable. Mike cleared his throat and tried to joke about it. But no one laughed. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. But more than that, I was confused. What the hell had just happened? At first, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Ryan was overreacting. I mean, we'd been married for 8 years. We'd been through way worse than this. He just needed to cool off. And by the time we got home, everything would be fine. But as the minutes ticked by and he didn't come back, I started to worry. I stayed at Mike and Ashley's for another hour, trying to act like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was spiraling. When I finally drove home, Ryan's car wasn't in the driveway. I texted him, asking where he was, but he didn't reply. By the time I crawled into bed that night, I was torn between anger and guilt. Part of me felt bad for embarrassing him. But another part of me thought, "Come on, Ryan, it was just a joke. Why are you being so sensitive?" The next day, he still wasn't home. He texted me once, a short, clipped message that read, "I need some space." Space? What was that supposed to mean? We had 2 kids, a house, bills to pay. There was no room for space in our lives. I wanted to call him, to demand he come home and stop being so dramatic. But something held me back. Maybe it was his tone. Or maybe it was the tiny voice in the back of my mind telling me I'd crossed a line. The kids, Sophia and Ethan, noticed his absence right away. "Where's Daddy?" Sophia asked at breakfast, her big brown eyes full of confusion. I forced a smile and told her he had to work late. But as the days turned into a week, the lies became harder to maintain. Ryan didn't come home, and he didn't call. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't know him at all. Looking back, I realize now that it wasn't just about that one night. It wasn't just about me telling him to man up in front of our friends. That moment was just the breaking point. The truth is, I'd been pushing Ryan for years without even realizing it. It started small, little comments about him not being ambitious enough, not helping out enough, not being enough. I thought I was just venting. But to him, it must have felt like I was tearing him down piece by piece. There were other things, too. The way I handled, or didn't handle, our finances. Always overspending and expecting him to clean up the mess. The way I made decisions for our family without consulting him. As if his opinion didn't matter. The way I constantly compared him to other husbands, the ones who seemed tougher, funnier, more confident. I thought I was just being honest. But now I see how much damage I was doing. The thing is, Ryan never said much about it. He wasn't the type to argue or complain. He just dealt with it. He kept his head down and kept going. And I took that as a sign that everything was fine. But it wasn't. He wasn't. And I was too wrapped up in my own frustrations to notice. Now, sitting here in an empty house, I can't stop thinking about that night. The way he looked at me when I said those words. The way he walked out without a single glance back. I used to think Ryan was the strongest person I knew. Someone who could handle anything. But now I realize he wasn't invincible. He was human, and I had been breaking him down piece by piece. One careless word at a time. I don't know if I can fix this. I don't even know if I deserve to. But I do know one thing. I never thought I could lose Ryan. And now, I'm terrified I already have. It didn't take long for me to realize that Ryan walking out that night wasn't just about my comment in front of our friends. It wasn't just one moment, it was the culmination of so many little things I had done. So many little ways I had chipped away at him without even realizing it. But at the time, I didn't want to see it. I told myself he was overreacting. That he was being dramatic. I mean, we'd been through worse, hadn't we? But then I started replaying everything in my head. The silence, the distance, the way Ryan's shoulders sagged more each day. The way he avoided meeting my eyes when we talked about bills or the kids. And then there were the things he never said, the weight I should have seen but chose to ignore. I had thought we were fine. That we were just a normal couple dealing with life's stresses. But I'd been wrong, and now, I couldn't stop thinking about all the ways I'd let him down. For years, Ryan had been the steady one in our relationship. The one who made sure the mortgage was paid on time. Who fixed the leaky faucet without being asked. Who stayed calm when the kids were sick or the car broke down. He was the problem solver. The rock I leaned on whenever life felt overwhelming. And I was the one who made the messes. I'd always been impulsive, reckless with money and decisions. But Ryan never complained. At least, not out loud. There was the time I maxed out our credit card buying furniture we didn't need because I'd seen it on a lifestyle blog. When Ryan saw the statement, he didn't yell or accuse me of being irresponsible. He just sighed, sat down with his laptop, and spent the next 3 hours figuring out how to move money around to cover the bills. "It's fine," he said when I apologized. "We'll figure it out." And we always did, or rather, he did. Or the time I signed the kids up for 3 different extracurricular activities without consulting him. He had to rearrange his work schedule to make sure someone could drive Ethan to soccer and Sophia to ballet on opposite sides of town. When I realized what a logistical nightmare I'd created, I laughed it off, saying, "It'll be fine, we'll make it work." And he did. But looking back, I can still see the tightness in his jaw. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he thought I wasn't looking. He was tired then, I just didn't notice. I started thinking about the little things, too. The way I'd tease him about being too serious. Too quiet. Too boring. "Why can't you be more like Mike?" I joked once after Mike made the group laugh with one of his over-the-top stories. I didn't mean anything by it, it was just a joke. But Ryan didn't laugh. He just gave me that small, tight smile and changed the subject. At the time, I thought he was just being sensitive. Now, I wonder how many times I said something like that. Something that seemed harmless to me but cut him a little deeper each time. And then there was the way I handled stress. When things got hard, when the kids were acting up or the bills piled up, I'd lash out. I'd snap at Ryan, accuse him of not helping enough, not doing enough, not being enough. He'd stay calm, letting my words roll off him like water off a rock. But even rocks erode over time, don't they? I think that's what happened to Ryan. I wore him down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. The days after that night at Mike and Ashley's felt like a blur. Ryan didn't come home, and his texts were short, distant. I didn't know where he was staying. He wouldn't tell me, but I knew he wasn't with his sister Lauren. She'd called me the day after he left, asking if everything was okay. I lied, of course, telling her it was just a little argument. Nothing to worry about. But Lauren isn't stupid. She knew something was wrong. Emily, she said, her voice careful, maybe you should give him some space. He's been under a lot of pressure lately. Under a lot of pressure. That phrase stuck with me. At first, it annoyed me. What about my pressure? I was the one juggling work and the kids in the house. I was the one making sure everyone had clean clothes and dinner on the table. I was under pressure, too. Why didn't anyone seem to see that? But as the days turned into weeks, I started to realize that the pressure Ryan was under wasn't the same as mine. Yes, I was stressed, but I always had him to lean on. Who did Ryan have? Who was there for him when the weight of everything got too heavy? The answer was no one. He carried it all by himself because he thought that's what a good husband and father was supposed to do. And instead of helping him, I made it harder. The first time I saw him after he left was 2 weeks later. At Ethan's soccer game, he was standing on the sidelines, his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Ryan's always been tall and broad-shouldered, but there was something about the way he held himself that made him seem smaller. Like the world had finally broken him down. I wanted to go to him, to say something, but I didn't know what. What could I say that would make up for everything I'd done? So I stayed on the other side of the field, watching as he cheered for Ethan and clapped when the team scored. When the game was over, he gave Ethan a quick hug and left before I could work up the courage to talk to him. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and thought about all the ways I'd failed him. I thought about the fights, the jokes, the careless words that had chipped away at his spirit. And for the first time, I admitted to myself that this wasn't just Ryan's problem. It was mine, too. I had taken him for granted. I had pushed him too far. And now, I was terrified that I'd pushed him too far to ever come back. It had been 3 weeks since Ryan left, and I hadn't heard much from him aside from a few brief texts about the kids. Nothing about us. Nothing about whether he was coming back. Every day, the silence between us grew louder, filling the spaces where laughter and conversation used to live. I kept waiting for him to make the first move, to come home and tell me he was ready to work things out. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. If I wanted to fix this, I'd have to be the one to step up. I debated for days whether I should reach out. What would I even say? Would he want to hear it? Or would I just make things worse? I played out every possible scenario in my head, but none of them ended well. Still, I knew I couldn't leave things like this. I couldn't let our marriage fall apart without at least trying to fight for it. So I called him. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number. And when he answered, I almost hung up. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like he'd already accepted something I wasn't ready to face. Hey, he said, and for a moment, I couldn't find the words. Hi, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I think we need to talk. There was a pause, and then he sighed. Yeah, I think we do. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near the kids' school. Neutral ground. The drive there felt like the longest 10 minutes of my life. My stomach was in knots, and my heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. I kept rehearsing what I was going to say, but nothing felt right. What if he didn't believe me? What if it was already too late? When I walked into the coffee shop, Ryan was already there. He was sitting at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped in a way that made him look older than his 35 years. My chest tightened at the sight of him. This wasn't the Ryan I knew. This was a man who had been carrying far too much for far too long. Hey, I said softly as I approached the table. He glanced up, his expression unreadable, and nodded. I sat down across from him, feeling the weight of everything I wanted to say pressing down on me. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The hum of conversation and the clinking of coffee cups around us felt distant, like white noise in the background of something much heavier. Finally, I broke the silence. "Ryan, I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling, "for everything." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a sip of his coffee, his eyes fixed on the table between us. When he finally looked at me, there was a sadness in his eyes that made my throat tighten. "What exactly are you sorry for, Emily?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Because I need to know if you actually understand what's been happening. Or if this is just another apology to make yourself feel better." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't going to make this easy. And honestly, I didn't blame him. I had taken the easy way out for years, brushing things off, making excuses, expecting him to just deal with it. If I wanted him to believe me, I had to do more than say the words. I had to own up to everything. "I'm sorry for not seeing how much you've been carrying," I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I'm sorry for not appreciating everything you've done for me and the kids. For taking you for granted. For making you feel like you had to fix everything on your own." He didn't say anything, but the way his jaw tightened told me he was listening. So I kept going. "I've been selfish, Ryan. I've been so focused on what I wanted, on what I thought I deserved, that I didn't stop to think about what you needed. I thought you were fine because you never said anything. But that's not an excuse. I should have known. I should have been paying attention." I paused, my throat tightening as the words caught in my chest. "I hurt you," I admitted, my voice breaking. "And I'm so sorry for that." For a moment, the only sound was the distant chatter of other customers and the hiss of the espresso machine. Then Ryan leaned back in his chair, his eyes searching mine. "Do you know how long I've been waiting to hear you say that?" he asked, his voice low. "Years, Emily. I've been waiting for you to see me, to see what I've been doing for this family. And every time I thought you might get it, you'd just brush it off. Like it didn't matter." "I know," I said quickly, the tears I'd been holding back threatening to spill over. "I know I've messed up, Ryan, over and over again. And I don't blame you for being angry. You have every right to be. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." He looked away, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. "It's not that simple," he said after a moment. "I've given everything I have to this marriage, Emily, and I'm not sure I have anything left to give." His words cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. For years, I had relied on Ryan's strength, his resilience, his ability to hold everything together no matter how hard things got. I never thought there would come a day when he'd have nothing left. But here we were, and it was my fault. "I don't expect you to just forgive me and move on," I said, my voice trembling. "I know it's going to take time. But I want to try. Ryan, I want to be better, for you. For the kids. For myself. Please. Just, give me a chance to prove that I can change." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared down at the table, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "I don't know if I can believe that, Emily. I've heard you say you'd change before. But nothing ever really changed. How do I know this time is different?" "I don't have an answer for that," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you. I know I've let you down. But I'm not ready to give up on us. Not yet." Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, he looked so tired, so worn down, that my heart ached. "I need time," he said finally. "I need to figure out if this is something I can keep fighting for. Because right now, Emily, I don't know." I nodded, even though his words felt like a dagger in my chest. "Take all the time you need," I said, my voice shaking. "Just, please don't give up on us." He didn't promise me anything. He didn't say he wouldn't leave, or that we'd find our way back to each other. But as he stood up and walked out of the coffee shop, I knew this was my chance, maybe my last chance, to prove that I could be the wife he needed. And I was determined not to waste it. The house felt empty without Ryan. It wasn't just the physical absence, it was the silence. The void left by his steady presence. The kids had stopped asking why Daddy wasn't coming home. But their confusion and unease were still there. etched into their faces. I'd always thought I could handle everything on my own. That I didn't need to rely on anyone, but now, with Ryan gone, I realized just how much he had been holding everything together. Sophia and Ethan were my only anchors in the chaos. Every morning, I got up, made them breakfast, and pretended like everything was normal. I plastered on a smile and said things like, "Daddy's just busy right now." But they weren't stupid. They knew something was wrong. Sophia, my sensitive little girl, had started clinging to me more, asking questions like, "Mommy, are you okay?" And Ethan, who was only 7, was acting out in ways he never had before, throwing tantrums, refusing to do his homework. It was like they could feel the cracks in our family, even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. And I couldn't blame them. They were just kids, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt unstable. And I was trying to do the same. Ryan's words from the coffee shop replayed in my mind constantly. "You don't see how much I've been carrying. Every time I think you're going to change, you just do something else. I don't know if I have anything left to give." They weren't accusations, they were truths. Ones I hadn't wanted to hear but couldn't ignore anymore. For years, I'd been blind to the way my actions affected him. And now I was paying the price. For the first time in our marriage, I started to really look at myself, at the person I had become. I wasn't proud of what I saw. I had always thought of myself as a good wife, a good mother, but the reality was different. I was selfish, impulsive, and careless. I had taken Ryan for granted, assuming he'd always be there to clean up my messes, to forgive my mistakes, to carry the weight I didn't want to shoulder. And in doing so, I had broken the man I loved. I started thinking back to all the moments I had ignored or dismissed. The way Ryan would rub his temples when I told him about another impulsive purchase I'd made, trying to figure out how we'd afford it. The way he'd quietly step in to help with the kids when I was overwhelmed, even if he'd had a long day at work. The way he'd put his dreams on hold to make sure our family was okay. And I had never thanked him for any of it. I had never even noticed how much he was sacrificing, how much he was giving, until it was too late. One night, after the kids were in bed, I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. I didn't know what I was doing at first, just that I needed to get the thoughts out of my head. I started writing, and before I knew it, the words were pouring out of me. "Ryan, I know I've said I'm sorry before, but I need to say it again. I need you to know that I mean it. I see now how much I've hurt you, how much I've taken you for granted. I see how much you've been carrying, and I hate that I didn't see it sooner. I've been selfish, I've been reckless, I've been everything you don't deserve, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all the times I made you feel like you weren't enough. For all the times I put my own wants ahead of our family's needs. You've always been my rock, Ryan, the one I could count on, the one who made everything okay. But I didn't realize that you needed someone to lean on, too. I didn't realize how much I was asking of you, how much I was expecting you to give without giving anything back. I want to change, Ryan, not just for you, but for me. I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't want to be the reason you feel broken. I know I've messed up, and I know it's going to take more than words to fix this. But I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to fight for us, for our family, for the life we built together. I love you. I always have, and I hope it's not too late to show you that. Emily." I sat there staring at the letter, my hands trembling. I wasn't sure if I would actually give it to him. Part of me was terrified he wouldn't even read it, that he'd see my words as too little, too late. But another part of me, the part that still believed in us, knew I had to try. The next day, I called Lauren, Ryan's sister. She had always been kind to me, but I knew she was fiercely protective of her brother. If anyone knew where Ryan's head was at, it was her. "Emily," she said when she answered, her tone cautious. "What's going on?" I told her everything. About the fight, about the coffee shop, about the letter. By the time I was done, tears were streaming down my face, and my voice was shaking. "I just want to make things right," I said, "but I don't know if he'll let me." Lauren was quiet for a moment, and then she sighed. "Ryan's hurting," she said. "He's been hurting for a long time. But I think part of him still loves you. He just doesn't know if he can trust you not to hurt him again. Her words hit me hard. Trust. That was the real issue. Wasn't it? It wasn't just about apologizing or promising to change. It was about proving that I could. That I would. Do you think he'd read the letter? I asked. I don't know, Lauren admitted, but I think it's worth a shot. That evening, I drove to Ryan's apartment. My hands were shaking as I slipped the letter under his door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood as if I could will him to open it right then and there. But he didn't, and so, with my heart pounding in my chest, I turned and walked away. The next few days were agonizing. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, hoping it was Ryan, but it never was. I went about my days like a robot, taking care of the kids, going to work, trying to keep it together. But inside, I was falling apart. And then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Ryan. Hey, he said when I answered. His voice was soft, hesitant. Hi, I said, my heart racing. Did you get my letter? I did, he said. There was a pause, and then he added, can we talk? The weeks after that last conversation with Ryan were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. When he said he needed more time, I wanted to push back, to demand a clear answer. But I knew that would only drive him further away. So I waited. I gave him space. Even though every day that passed felt like an eternity. I told myself I was being patient. But deep down, I knew I was terrified. Terrified that no matter how hard I tried to fix things, it would never be enough. Ryan kept his distance. But he didn't shut me out entirely. He still showed up for the kids, picking them up for soccer games or taking them out for ice cream. Watching him with Sophia and Ethan was a painful reminder of everything I'd risked losing. He was still the same caring, dependable father he'd always been. But there was a wall between us now, one that I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to break down. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the family photo on the mantel. It was taken 3 years ago on a beach trip. Sophia was perched on Ryan's shoulders, her face lit up with laughter, while Ethan clung to my side, his tiny hand gripping mine. We looked happy. We were happy, at least. I thought we were. But now, looking at that photo, all I could see were the cracks I hadn't noticed back then. The exhaustion in Ryan's eyes. The way his smile didn't quite reach his face. How had I missed it? I spent that night writing in a journal. Something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I poured out every thought, every regret, every fear that had been building inside me since Ryan walked out. And for the first time, I let myself be completely honest. Honest about how I'd let my own insecurities shape the way I treated him. Honest about how I'd used his stability as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility for my own actions. Honest about the fact that, deep down, I was just as scared of failing as he was, but instead of facing that fear, I'd pushed it onto him. When I finally closed the journal, it was almost dawn, but instead of feeling drained, I felt lighter, like I'd taken the first real step toward becoming the person I wanted to be, not just for Ryan, but for myself. A few days later, Ryan called. It wasn't about the kids this time. Can we meet? He asked. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach twist. Of course, I said, trying to keep the nerves out of my voice. We met at a park not far from his apartment. The air was crisp, and the trees were just starting to turn shades of orange and gold. Ryan was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with his hands clasped in front of him. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. I got your letter, he said finally, and I've been thinking about it a lot. I nodded, my heart pounding. I meant every word. I know you did, he said, his gaze steady. But, Emily, I don't think I can come back. The words hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to protest, to plead, but he held up a hand, stopping me. Let me finish, he said. This isn't about not loving you. I do. I probably always will. But love isn't enough if the foundation isn't there. And for a long time, our foundation hasn't been solid. We've both made mistakes, me included. But I don't think either of us can fix this by staying in the same cycle we've been in. Tears blurred my vision. But I forced myself to stay quiet. To listen. This was the conversation I'd been dreading. But I owed him the chance to speak his truth. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Ryan continued, and I've realized that what I need, and what I think you need, too, is time apart. Time to figure out who we are without the weight of all this hurt between us. Maybe that means we find our way back to each other someday. Maybe it doesn't, but I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. I wiped at my eyes, trying to steady my voice. So, this is it? For now, he said softly. I think it has to be. We sat there in silence for a while, watching as a group of kids kicked a soccer ball across the field. I wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, that we could fix this if we just tried harder. But deep down, I knew he was right. We couldn't rebuild what we had while standing on broken ground. I want you to know, he said after a while, that I'm proud of you. For reaching out, for trying to change, and I hope you keep doing that, no matter what happens between us. Thanks, I whispered, my throat tight. And, I hope you find what you're looking for, too. He nodded, his expression softening. Take care of yourself, Emily. You too. As I watched him walk away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, grief. Yes. But also something else. Something like hope. Not for us, necessarily, but for the person I was becoming. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking to Ryan to fix me. I was learning to do that on my own. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat down with my journal again. And instead of writing about regret, I wrote about the future. About the kind of mother I wanted to be for Sophia and Ethan. About the kind of person I wanted to be for myself. And as I closed the journal, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps us out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. We've got plenty more exciting content coming your way. And we'd love to have you along for the journey. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.